Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success. I'm Therese Perez, a change strategist and practitioner with over 20 years of experience designing and delivering impactful change programs across various industries. In this podcast, I share real-world practical strategies to help you create and deliver positive change experiences, whether you're a leader, practitioner, or someone looking to bring new ways of working to life. In today's fast-paced world, change is constant. Here we focus on how you can put people at the centre of your change strategy, because people with a sense of purpose are the most important link in driving performance. So if you're ready to create meaningful change and achieve all the success that comes with it, keep listening. Together, let's change the conversation and take it to the next level. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese Perez, and I'm the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I am recording on Tharawal country and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which we meet, and elders both past, present, and emerging. Today we're talking about frustration in the change landscape, and boy, oh boy, I'm sure you have felt before how frustrating it can be to introduce change. And there are a couple of things, obviously, at My Virtual Change Manager that we try to provide, such as frameworks, a different way of thinking, when we talk about the change intelligence journey, developing your change intelligence, and a lot of this has to do with alleviating the stress and frustration for people when introducing change, when influencing for change, or implementing change. They're kind of the three different areas that we find people find themselves in. And there's enough stress in life, right? So we want to make sure that the stress that your team members feel or that you feel in the change landscape is minimized. There's a healthy stress around change being exciting or change being something as an opportunity for you versus change being mismanaged, stress being applied, excessive stress being applied and unfairly applied many times, and for you to be able to cope with that. So let's go through the 5 frustrations that I wrote down. I was thinking about what are the key things, the recurring things that I see or that I feel or that I experience myself or have seen others experience when we've brought change in to an organization, or whether I've had to lead change or whether I've had to absorb change in some way, shape or form. These are the things and the frustrations that are often felt. The first is a lack of access to the stakeholders, to the leaders, to be able to engage them on the change. And I get it. Everyone's busy in organizations. And I know, having been a leader a number of times, around the work I need to do with my team, the BAU as such, the business as usual, that I need to run. But getting access to leaders is one of the key frustration areas that most change managers will raise, or even for leaders getting time of their leaders to have the change explained to them. And it's frustrating because the expectation doesn't go away that you're going to lead or implement the change well, but there's almost a ridiculous mindset that happens to where everyone's busy and don't provide or create the time or prioritize the time so that the change can be properly explained, can be properly led, and this causes issues down the track. So that's one of the frustration areas. One way to resolve that area of frustration is to upfront be explaining to the leaders a time requirement if they're sponsoring the program from a change perspective, but also ensuring that they are creating and integrating the change conversation with their day-to-day so that it's not seen as an extra burden. It's actually about how they integrate this change conversation into their team meetings, into their governance structures, whatever it may be, is utilizing their current channels as much as possible. Now, the second area is around the lack of clarity. It can be a big frustration, both for leaders as well as any change practitioners, or even if you're influencing for change, the lack of clarity that can happen around what are we actually trying to achieve here. And this also can sometimes lend itself to poor design or poor design thinking within an organization if the design for the solution itself isn't as robust as it should be. So a bit of that frustration, it can happen when you're trying to absorb the information from whether it be executive team members, your own leader, or whether it be a program or project team talking to you about the change, and you're confused. You're not clear on exactly what is happening, when is it happening, etc., etc. So a couple of things around how this can be solved for, and I talk about this in a couple of blog posts that we've done in the past around how to create clarity. And once again, takes a bit of time for the messages and the messaging to be tested and to hit the mark. And if you're going to co-design some of the communications, it's even better, where you can workshop with leaders around the change and get the language that they use to be able to communicate the change will help around being able to then digest the information if you're being impacted by the change, but also for leaders who are meant to lead the change, they will be able to get a better level of understanding if you're using the words and the terms that they would typically use in their organisation or in their leadership teams and groups. The third one, and this is going to be one of these recurring issues, certainly in areas of frustration, which is the lack of resource support. And again, this comes down to a bit around the change capacity conversation, around whether the organisation has properly scoped the requirement of this change. And from a resourcing perspective, oftentimes, and I think I've talked about this before, you're drawing on the same pool of subject matter experts. And this is a really frustrating and can seem unsolvable issue. However, the biggest way in which to address this is to raise this at the executive level and have clear decisions being made around priorities and clear lessons around time commitment required of subject matter experts, with either a view that the subject matter expert needs to be released from their role and backfilled, or the subject matter expert will have less on their plate. So their direct line leader, making sure that this individual has less to do in their business as usual landscape. The single point dependency and the risk associated with that is always evident, and when not resolved for, but just a latent expectation or a passive participation in a conversation from executive leadership is not adequate enough, especially if the subject matter expert or person in question is also expressing a bit of burnout and fatigue, becomes a flight risk, but also, especially if not solved over time, absolutely that person will leave. Typically they are high performers, which doesn't help either. So this type of issue and frustration, even from a program perspective, because they can't get the time with the people who are holders of the knowledge, really comes down to how well a leader is managing the capacity and the dependency on that individual. So really, there's some great strategies around unpacking that. As I said, taking business as usual activities off their plate and redistributing that across the team, or releasing that person consciously and backfilling their role. And doing that sooner rather than later in a program is really, really necessary. Okay, number 4, unclear roles and responsibilities. This is really common as well, and it causes conflict. And oftentimes this is because there's this whole assumed world where if you're setting up a program team, you assume that everyone knows their roles. You assume that everyone understands how a program works, and that is really flawed thinking. And this is very much around making sure that you have a roles and responsibilities session from a team perspective, and then revisit that on a regular basis so that the conflict is avoided, the points of tension are avoided, and that you can get the best from the teaming concept as possible. So when the frustration arises, or you start to see that there's conflict happening and it's happening pretty regularly, or on the informal grapevine that there's feedback coming through that people aren't happy about things, you've got to lean into that conversation to make sure that those frustrations don't boil over into outright conflict or outright team dysfunction, and so that you can also make sure that everyone's held accountable for their pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the change. So really important to mediate and to hold those sessions sooner rather than later if that is starting to become an issue. Then the last frustration, and I'm seeing this is really interesting from a change perspective, but it does seem to be a bit bubbling above the surface, is around the perception of change. And I think that it really does mean that it's the I want change and I want a change manager on this piece of work, yet a struggle from a mindset perspective to allow the change person to ask the questions and to get the information that they need. And sometimes this can be because people don't like being challenged. They just want people to do the job they've been told to do. And as change managers, we'll ask, well, why are we doing this? Have we got a business case? Have we got benefits? Are we really clear on what we are introducing and what we want to implement? That can be seen as confrontational, and that's simply not the truth. The change manager is required to ask those questions. Now, how they approach that, of course, is up to the individual. And certainly I've never had huge blowback when I've been navigating documents, and I do it a little bit where I investigate first to see what's there and not press too hard if I know I'm trying to ask for something that simply isn't there. And I think this is where changes can become a bit judgmental. And I'd say if you found yourself in that situation, like, pick your battles. And I don't see the benefit of judgment or judging organizations who may not have structure charts, which is pretty common, which may not have a business case for a piece of work that you're introducing, because they're running at speed. They need to make the change. They want to deliver that. Everyone's on board to move through that. So you don't want to have to backtrack or force people to backtrack so that you can do their job. You need to be able to work within that ambiguity. I understand the frustration at times, though, that can happen for change practitioners where they've been brought on board and yet they're not enabled to do their role. So if they're getting blocked from going and engaging the impacted business areas, for example, or if they're not, from a program perspective, not being heard around the program table when they're asking questions, because the drive is, sometimes the drive in technology programs is just to deliver that piece of tech. And therefore the questions they're asking, it's not that people don't want to answer them, it's that they don't understand what's being asked of them, because typically in the old IT landscape and the traditional IT landscape, the project managers really, they're just around delivering the IT functionality. They're not really cognizant or thinking of the people impact, and they don't appreciate the challenge because they're under stress too. So some of these things can really grind within a project. And so what we really want to do is, once again, it comes down to communication, a bit of clarity around role, a bit of clarity around why the changee is there and asking the questions, and ensuring that there is a mindset of openness and collaboration and teamwork. And this can really have it where if you take the approach of including those who are impacted in the conversation, then it's not seen as the change person directly challenging the program. Part of it is enabling the conversation through having those who are impacted at the table to have a voice, and always ensuring that you're communicating your intent is to get the people to adopt the change, and for the customer or those who are impacted to be able to get buy-in and ownership of that change. No one's really going to challenge you if your focus is for a better outcome. So they're just 5 frustrations. I mean, there are a lot of micro frustrations that can happen through the change areas as you go and deliver change. And certainly if you're a change leader, you might have other frustrations, like people not really listening or reading communication or wanting to engage with the conversation. That can be frustrating, but that is, once again, that's the human element, which I find the most fascinating about change, is how can you connect with people, how can you inspire people, and how can you move them through their change process so that you can move people from where they currently are to where you would like them to be, whether it be with a new process, with new tech, with new policy, whatever that may look like. It's very much around how you can connect. So the 5 frustrations we've covered off: lack of time, quite endemic in most organisations, so leadership and stakeholders not prioritising the time to be able to attend change impact workshops, to have the change discussion, to work on the messaging. Lack of clarity about the change, so exactly what is happening and why are we doing it. Lack of resource support, which definitely can happen where the programs aren't resourced effectively and there's just this expectation that people will pick up the slack. Unclear roles and responsibilities, absolutely a point of frustration which can happen in projects and programs, and just the general perception of change that I want change, yet I don't really want to dedicate the time or to validate the change process through the workings that the change specialist might be bringing to the table. I hope this has helped. You might be able to relate to some of these frustrations. And what I would say is, if you're interested in this change space, then come across to myvirtualchangemanager.com. And thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, we've got weekly episodes happening. If you know of someone else who might benefit from hearing about this, who's in this change space, feel free to let them know and leave a rating, provide feedback. That's how more people can find us. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Hi, it's Therese here again. I just wanted to mention that we have the Change Intelligence webinar series happening this year, and you don't want to miss out on any of the topics that we're going to cover. It's a live webinar series talking about change resilience, change frameworks, connected thinking, how you can change your mindset and the mindset of others, behavioural change and what that can offer. If you don't want to miss out, then come to myvirtualchangemanager.com. Just simply register and we'll let you know when the next webinars are happening so that you can come along. Spaces are limited, so be sure to jump across and register as soon as you can, and you'll see some of the topics that we're going to cover. I hope to see you there and to continue to work with you to create positive change experiences.